Welcome to everybody, and thank you for coming to Sinai X this year. Thank you for coming in such large numbers. We have a Jewish community that is a shining example and a source of inspiration to Jews around the world. And we've done so many great things together, and it's so wonderful to see so many people here. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our Rosh Beis Din, of our Rabbonim, of the ambassador from Israel, Mr. Arthur Lenk, the chairman and the president of the UOS, Mr. Harold Novick and Jonathan Levitt, communal leaders, our honored donors, ladies and gentlemen. It's such an honor to be with you here this afternoon. We've all done so many great things together. We've created Sinai in Darba. We've inspired the world to keep Shabbos together. And this afternoon, we're doing something completely new and different together. And that is so exciting because in life, and that is the message of Sinai X, in life it is so important to innovate, to reinvent, to renew ourselves. In fact, we say it each and every single morning in our morning prayers. We say about Hashem, HaMechadesh B'tuvo B'chol Yom Tamid Maaseh Bereshit, that God renews creation each and every single day. He doesn't just leave it. He renews it with fresh energy. And Rav Shlomo Walby explains that we should follow in Hashem's example. And in the same way that Hashem innovates and renews and refreshes creation, so too we have to innovate, renew and refresh ourselves, never being complacent, never being satisfied with who we are and what we have done, but always to push further and to create new things in our lives, in our family, in our community, all the time, looking for new opportunities to innovate and to refresh. And that is exactly what Sinai X is about. It's about innovation, it's about reinvention, it's about renewal. And to really understand it, look around you. Look around you in this magnificent room. Look at the people across the way. And what you are seeing here this evening, this afternoon, what you are seeing is a large gathering, the largest gathering of people coming together to learn. In fact, the world's largest Beit Midrash that exists anywhere in the world. There are big and beautiful yeshivas around the world, but to have in one room 2,000 people who've come together to learn Torah together is really an amazing and inspiring sight to behold, and we should all be so proud that we're here together to be part of it. And when we do that, we are joining not only with members of the South African Jewish community from right across the board, from every walk of life and background, but we are also joining with generations of Jews throughout the ages who've learned Torah exactly like we are going to do this afternoon, sitting and learning at tables with books and texts and debates and discussions, and of course with opinions. As Jews, we always have so many opinions, and this afternoon is an opportunity to express those opinions. And as Jews, we've been talking to each other and learning from each other for thousands of years, and we gathered here this afternoon to continue that age-old tradition of learning in the traditional style of what it really means to be a Jew, and to do so with one of the most favorite books of all time. It's very hard to talk about a favorite, but there is one treasured part of our Torah learning that has become so much part of the Jewish homes and hearts for thousands of years, and that is, of course, our beloved Pirkei Avot, chapters of the Fathers. And we gathered here this afternoon to learn Pirkei Avot together, the very first mission of Pirkei Avot, and I want to learn it with you. Let's learn together. In front of you, you have a pad, and open up to the first page of the Mishnah. It says, Introduction, the Mishnah. And the very first word of the Mishnah, let's read that together. The very first word of the Mishnah says, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moses received the Torah from Sinai. And that is where Jewish destiny all began. And I'll tell you how many years ago, exactly 3,328 years ago. Now that may sound like a long time, but if you give one generation for every 25 years, that amounts to 133 generations, which means if you translate it into Bobbers and Zaydas, we're talking about 60 Bobbers and Zaydas ago. That's all. where Jews stood at Mount Sinai and God gave us the Torah. And that is what the further Mishnah says. Moshe kibel Torah misinai. U'mesara liYehoshua. I'm continuing in the Mishnah. And he handed it to Joshua. V'Yehoshua leZakanim. And Joshua gave it to the elders. U'Zakanim leNeviim. And the elders gave it to the prophets. U'Neviim misarua la'anshe knesset hagadola. And the prophets handed it over to the men of the great assembly. And we are part of that tradition. For thousands of years, from generation to generation, from parents to children, from teacher to student, we have been learning Torah and we have received this tradition, and it is part of who we are. And so when we learn this afternoon, we are engaging in a conversation, not just with each other. We are engaging with a conversation with the people at our table, with our friends and family who are sitting with us, with the South African Jewish community in this beautiful, magnificent hall, but we are also engaging in a conversation across the ages, with generations of Jews. We are going to hear the voices and ideas of our friends this afternoon and our family. We are also going to hear the voices and ideas of our wonderful guest speakers who've come to join us. As you know, that the afternoon is divided into 3 sessions, and we're going to be hearing from the voices and ideas of our wonderful guest speakers. And I would like to welcome Rabbi Zev Leff, Rabbi David Millstone, and Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson, who have traveled from so far to be with us. We are going to hear from their voices and ideas, but we're also going to hear from the voices and ideas of some of our best previous Sinai and Darba speakers, who will be hearing on the headphones and will explain exactly how the headphones work. Don't be afraid of the headphones. We'll explain exactly how it works. I'm also not so technologically advanced, and I'll be taking you through it step by step, and if I understand it, believe me, you will understand it as well. So we'll be hearing voices and ideas from our guest speakers, from our best previous Sinai and Darba speakers, but we'll also be hearing the voices and ideas of the great sages of our history who have articulated and spoken about this Mishnah, and we will delve into their wisdom and into their insights. And that is the power of this experience, that we join a conversation that began 3,328 years ago. We continue that conversation to this day as we receive the Torah in that direct line. Now, we've chosen to spend this afternoon on the very first Mishnah. And the reason we've chosen the very first Mishnah is because, firstly, it's always good to start in the beginning, but also because it's a context for what we're doing. When we understand this chain of tradition, then we understand who we are and what we're doing here this afternoon. But also because it addresses some of the key challenges of our day. Because I want to focus, and this afternoon we're going to be looking at the 3 statements of the men of the Great Assembly. They said 3 things. Hem amru shlosha dvarim. Hevu metunim bedin. Be patient in judgment. I'm back in the Mishnah. V'hamidu talmidim harba, and establish many students. V'asiyu siag laTorah, and make a fence for the Torah. Those 3 statements is what we're going to be having a look at this afternoon. Why these 3? Because actually, the men of the Great Assembly lived in a time that was very similar to ours. They lived in a time of transition. It was the end of the Babylonian exile when the first temple had been destroyed, and they were returning to Israel. It was about the re-establishment of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel after an absence. And it was a time of assimilation. It was a time of anti-Semitism. It was a time of turbulence and uncertainty. And ladies and gentlemen, we also live in similar times. We are blessed to live in times of the re-establishment of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. What a blessing from God, the state of Israel that Hashem has given to us. But it is a time of turbulence, with terrorism, with many threats that face our beloved state of Israel, that face Europe and the world, and within our Jewish people, assimilation. It's a time of turbulence and uncertainty, and we know that even within the context of South Africa today, there's turbulence and uncertainty. And of course, we know that if the president had even one shred of self-respect, he would have resigned by now. But forgive me for being a little bit naughty from the stage. But the truth has to be said as well. And indeed, we live in times of change and times of transition, both locally and in the global Jewish world. And what is the answer in such times? So the Maharal of Prague, in his commentary on the Mishnah, says, the men of the Great Assembly gave direction for times of transition and turbulence, and they gave these 3 clear instructions. And from these 3 statements, we have a blueprint and a plan for Jewish life today. What is it? Be patient in judgment. Jewish society has to be based on justice, fairness, and ethics. Number 2, establish many students. A Jewish society, in order for it to thrive, and that is what this afternoon is about, it is about learning Torah en masse. Because we know that Jewish communities throughout the ages, where there's been an active and vibrant Torah learning, those communities have thrived, because when we are learning Torah, we know who we are, why we are here, what our mission is, what our identity is, what our purpose on this earth is. And so as a South African Jewish community, what is so important is for us to adopt these 3 instructions to ensure that our community conducts itself always with justice, fairness, and ethics, to ensure that we learn Torah as much as possible. And that is what this afternoon is about learning Torah. And then, of course, to make a fence for the Torah is all about the mitzvot, action. Because however important it is to learn, and to understand where we come from and who we are and what our values are, it is equally important to act and to live as a Jew with real action. So that's the 3-point plan: justice, learning, and mitzvot, and the practical actions of our commandments. And that is the blueprint for who we are and what we need to do in this time. And so we've chosen this Mishnah. And this afternoon, we are going to be looking at each one of those statements from different perspectives. First, we're going to have a look we're going to look at the first statement, Hevu Metunim Badin, and we're going to understand it from a different perspective, not only from the perspective of a judge who's sitting in court, but also from the perspective of how does that influence our day-to-day life. And each one of these statements we're going to look at not just from the macro perspective, but the wisdom and insight of what it's going to do for us each and every single day of our lives to change our lives in the most profound and wonderful way. And so the first session is going to be devoted to Hevu Metunim Badin, to be patient in judgment, the art of decision making, what that means, and to introduce that topic to understand what decision making is all about and understand the importance of care and concern in making important decisions. It is my great honor and great pleasure to call Rabbi Zev Leff onto the stage to address us.
First of all, good afternoon. The rabbis tell us that one should start speaking in honor of his hosts. So I want to give a thank you, first and foremost, to Rabbi and Rebbetzin Goldstein for inviting me and my wife here to be able to take part in this great and awesome occasion, and for giving us the merit that I'm sure will accrue from being here. I also want to thank Leon and Debbie Welcher, our hosts, while the time we are here, who have been our hosts in the past also, and to wish them life and health, to be able to do many, many mitzvahs and bring many guests into their home. And also to Nicole Knapp, who was a liaison between us and the office of the chief rabbi, for making it very easy for us to come from Eretz Yisrael here and take care of all the arrangements. The Mishnah says one of the 3 things that the Anshe Knesset Hagdola said was Hevu Metunim Badin, be patient, deliberate in issuing a verdict. The simple meaning is that it refers to a judge in a court of law. Before he delivers a verdict, he should be patient and deliberate. Since I'm not a judge, I asked an expert and experienced judge, Judge Goldstein, none other than the father of the chief rabbi, how he understood this Mishnah. And he told me that the main thing that a judge has to know is not to jump to conclusions and not to come to any conclusion before he hears all of the evidence, sees the entire picture. And that is the meaning of being patient and deliberate, not to jump to conclusions. However, the commentaries on this Mishnah explain that this exhortation of the rabbis does not only apply to judges, but applies to all of us. For all of us have to make judgments in our lives in many different ways. And they mention 3 specific ways. We judge others. We formulate opinions as to their personality and behavior. And before we make that judgment, we have to be patient and deliberate. We also judge God in his relationships with us and with others and with the world in general. And before we judge God, we should not jump the gun and be patient and deliberate and try to understand the background of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how God functions in this world. And most important, we have to be deliberating in judging issues that face us in life, to determine a course of action and to formulate a decision. And that also is included in having Mesunim Badin, because we are constantly judging situations, factors in life that need our verdict of how to function and how to proceed. In addition to seeing the breadth, the total picture, as Judge Goldstein mentioned, also one has to ponder and delve deeply and examine the depth of each factor. His bonenus, thinking deeply into something, is extremely important. For people who think shallowly and do not delve deeply remain people who are shallow. The Chafetz Chaim points out that Bilam Harasha could have had the same potential to be a Moshe Rabbeinu, yet he remained Bilam, and Moshe Rabbeinu was Moshe Rabbeinu. What was the difference between them? The Chafetz Chaim points out that in the Sedra, in the Torah, that deals with the prophecy of Bilam, there are no paragraphs in that Sedra, unlike most of the Torah, which is divided into paragraphs. And the Chafetz Chaim explains, why are there no paragraphs in that Sedra? Because the rabbis tell us that the paragraphs in the Torah were given as a sign where God taught Moshe Rabbeinu, and then he told him, review what I taught you. Discuss it with yourself. Understand it. And then he went on and gave him another paragraph. Moshe Rabbeinu pondered, looked into everything he learned, he became a Moshe Rabbeinu. Bilam Harasha never took the chance, never took the time to ponder and to look deeply in what he was taught. He took it shallowly, went on one thing after the other without stopping to think. And therefore he remained a Bilam Harasha. There's another idea in being patient and deliberating in making decisions, and that is to take the time to ask advice from others. And asking advice is not merely to get information that you don't have. But the rabbis tell us that before God created man, he asked advice of the angels, not because God needed advice, but because he wanted to teach us by example that even a greater person should ask advice from a person of lower stature. And on the surface, that needs explanation. If someone of a greater stature doesn't know, what's it going to help to ask somebody of a lower stature? Seems almost condescending. I know a little bit about the motors of cars, because if you have the cars that I have, you have to know something about them or you're stuck constantly. So if I hear a noise in the motor and I have an idea, maybe I understand what's the problem, but to be nice, I would ask my mother-in-law, who doesn't know where the motor of the car is. Ma, what do you think? What do you think the problem is? It's absurd. It's very condescending. If I don't know and I have a little bit of an idea what's going on, what is she going to know? So why is it important for a person of greater stature who knows more about something to ask advice from someone who knows less than him? The Meiri, one of the commentaries of the Middle Ages, says the following: every person is biased, subjective, when it comes to making decisions. And deep down, he knows what he would like his decision to be. And therefore, when he examines the various factors that will lead to his decision, he sees them in a very distorted and a very subjective way. He sees all the positive points of the factors that he would like to be, and all the negative points of the things that are not in keeping with what he would like the decision to be. As the rabbis say, the desires of a person blind his eyes and distort him from seeing the truth. I learned this many, many years ago, how a person's desires can totally distort their view of things, how they see things, how they see decisions that have to be made in life. I had a balabos somewhere in the past who was somewhat eccentric. And one day he burst into my office and he said, "Rabbi, save my daughter's life." And I said, "Calm down. I think you're in the wrong place. I am not Hatzalah. But how am I going to save your daughter's life?" He said, "My daughter is going out with a certain young yeshiva bacher, and she has expressed the desire to close this chiddush and to accept a marriage proposal." And then he went on to describe this young man as a cross between Genghis Khan, Hitler, and Haman. He said, if my daughter marries this young man, it's the end of her life, the end of my life, and the end of the world. You've got to convince her to break off this match. So I told him, look, we both know that you're a little eccentric, and that's why your daughter won't listen to you. And it's very hard for me to believe that this young man who is sitting in yeshiva and learning Torah is as bad as you portray him. But I'll make you a deal. I'm going to meet this young man by accident and strike up a conversation with him. And if in fact he's as bad as you say, I will convince your daughter to break this match. If, however, it's not as you say, I want you to give me your word that you will not stand in her way if she wants to accept the proposal. And we shook on it. And that week, I just happened by accident to find out the pizza place where this boy eats lunch. Just happened to sit at his table. Just happened to strike up a conversation with him for about 45 minutes. And at the end of that time, obviously, he wasn't as bad as the future father-in-law said, but there definitely was something seriously emotionally wrong with this young man. He was not a normal person. It was obvious. So I was going to keep up my side of the bargain. I called the girl in, and I was sure this was going to be easy to tell her that as an objective person, after meeting this person for 45 minutes, I realized he's not for her. He's not a normal person. And I would tell her various things that I saw, and her answers were astounding. just to give you an absurd example, if I would tell her, you know, I discovered that this young man is a serial killer. He's already murdered 7 wives. And she would look at me and say, I know, but he did it so sensitively. I'm telling you the man's a murderer. You're telling me he's sensitive. I thought to myself, this is a great chiddush. They're both not normal. But she was normal. She just had a desire to marry this young man. And I'll call pshoim techasa ava. When a person is subjective and biased, what they see is distorted. Their eyes can be blinded by a person's desires. And therefore, part of the patience and deliberation of making a decision is to ask advice, even from someone who knows less than you. But at least he can give you an objective view of the decision you have to make. He can give you an objective view of the factors, see them in their proper light, and now you can make the decision in a very objective way and not subjectively looking at the factors you like in a positive way and the factors you don't like in a negative way. The rabbis tell us, kloyos yoatzos, the kidneys are the source of advice. Doesn't mean the physical kidneys. Person has a neshama that patterns itself, or more properly, the body patterns itself after the neshama. And there's a spiritual kidney also, but it patterns itself after the physical kidney. And that is where the source of advice is. I was thinking that perhaps the function of the kidney is to filter out all of the poisons and impurities and leave the liquids of the body pure. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, in the book of Nishlei, says, Mayim amukim eitza belev ish, v'ish chochem yidlenu. Advice is like water, deep water, in the well springs of a person's heart. And a wise person can draw out those waters. Advice is compared to water. If you want that water to be pure and clear, then you need to filter out all of the bias and all of the subjectivity. For this, however, you need an advisor, even a friend, who can put himself in your situation. I always like to say, a chaver, a friend, is the same letters as Rav, as a rabbi, with an extra ches, an extra 8. The number 8 represents something beyond nature. Sometimes a friend can be beyond nature, more than a Rav, more than a rabbi in giving advice. But that which is beyond nature is the following. If someone comes to me for advice, and I say, what would I do if I had that situation? My advice is worthless. Because if I would have that situation, I would have my bias and my subjectivity. So I'm trading his bias and subjectivity for mine. What I have to say is, if I were him, with all of his factors, then what would I do as him, but as him without his subjectivity and bias? And that takes someone who can go beyond nature, who can put himself in someone else's shoes and give advice according to that person's situation and not his own situation. In last week's Sedra, the rabbis tell us that Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, each independently came to a decision to do something that was wrong, to bring a strange fire before God. One of the sins that they are guilty of, says the rabbis, is they didn't ask advice from each other, which on the surface seems very strange. Because since each independently decided to do what they did, what would it help if they asked each other? Well, the answer is, had Nadav said to Avihu, I came up with this great idea, what do you think? Then Avihu would have put himself in Nadav's shoes, divested himself of his bias and subjectivity, and he would have told him, I don't think it's a great idea. When he thought about it for himself, he was biased and subjective and came to the conclusion that it's good to do. But he had been able to put himself in someone else's shoes without the bias, without the subjectivity, he would have realized that it's not something to do. More than that, even if someone knows what he has to do, there's no options. The verdict, the decision has to be one specific way. Can't be anything else. There's still an idea to be patient, deliberate, and to ask advice. Because it's not only what a person does that is significant in this world, but it's what his intention is, what his emotions are when he's doing it. I'll give you an example. Two people get up Shabbos morning. They want to go to shul, to daven, and to hear the Torah read. One of them says, I hope the Torah reader, the Baal Koreh, does a good job, because I would hate to have to correct him and embarrass him publicly, but I want to fulfill my mitzvah of hearing the Torah read, and therefore I hope he does a good job, and it's not necessary for me to correct him. Second person gets up in the morning, and he says, I hear that this Torah reader is a person I don't really like. I hope he makes a lot of mistakes so I can really correct him and show him up. They both go to shul, and they both listen to the reading of the Torah. And sure enough, the Torah reader makes a mistake, and they both jump and correct him. One of them has a mitzvah, because his intention is to fulfill the mitzvah of hearing the Torah read, and he wants it done properly. And the other one has a terrible sin of embarrassing somebody publicly. They both did the same exact thing, but the motivation, the intent is different. The intent and motivation can change a mitzvah into an aveira, a mitzvah into a sin. And therefore, it's important to ask advice, not only to know what to do. It says that when Avraham Avinu was given the mitzvah of milah, of circumcision, he went to ask the advice of 3 non-Jews, his friends, Balei Bris Avraham, Honor, Eshkol, and Mamre. Avraham Avinu obviously didn't have to ask advice should he fulfill God's command or not. He knew he had to. But he went to hear from these people who could relate to a covenant. They had a covenant with him. What his intention should be. What does God want from him? How should he view this mitzvah? Not what should he do. How should he do it? And it says that Honor and Eshkol told him, we don't think it's a great idea. God probably wants you to commit suicide. You're an old man. You're going to go through this operation. You're going to die. God wants you to die in the sanctification of his name. And the other one told him, even if you survive the operation, you just conquered 4 kings who conquered 5 kings. Their relatives are going to take revenge when you are weak and unable to defend yourself. And only Mamre said, look, Avraham, God saved you from the fiery furnace. He gave you victory over 4 kings. God has a good track record with you. I would do what he says, and don't worry. Only Mamre was able to put himself in Avraham's shoes. Honor and Eshkol said, if we had this mitzvah and we were old people, what would it be? And they were right in what they gave the advice, but it was no advice. Only Mamre was able to put himself in Avraham Avinu's shoes. Understand, if I was Avraham Avinu and was saved miraculously time and time again, then this is the intent, this is the emotion I would have when fulfilling this mitzvah. The main kind of advice and patience in making decisions is to find out what God's advice is. And how do we do that? We don't have prophets anymore who can give us a direct line to God. But we have people greater than prophets, sages, Torah sages, Torah sages whose whole thought process, whose whole worldview, whose whole database is based on Torah, and therefore they think like the Torah thinks, and the Torah is God's mind. And that is why we go to Torah sages to seek advice, because what would God want me to do? And they know, because they know what the Torah says, and their minds are attuned to thinking like God thinks. And just to tell you how fortunate you are in this community, that you have a caring individual, a man of Torah vision, a man of action. And I refer to Chief Rabbi Goldstein, together with his Ashes Chayil, the Rebbetzin. You are so fortunate to be able to have an individual like this, to be able to give you Torah guidance and Torah advice. In addition to that, the many dayanim, of course, like the Abdeisdin, Rosh Yeshiva, congregational rabbis of Johannesburg and South Africa in general, who can lead and advise and teach and show the way. The men of the Great Assembly came at a time in Jewish history where there was no more prophecy. Prophecy had been taken away, and they saw before them a long exile that would bring Jews to all corners of the earth and present them with problems and issues and questions and doubts that face Jewry in general and every individual. And therefore they gave this advice, Haviu Mesunim Badin, be very patient and deliberating in making decisions as individuals, as families, as congregations, and as Klal Yisrael. And if we take that advice, the exhortation of our rabbis, and are patient in making our personal decisions, our congregational decisions, in how we judge each other, in how we judge God, and how we judge ourselves in all of the issues that face us, and then we'll be able to proceed on a steady path with success. And therefore, each and every one should learn Torah, because the main advice that one gets is from the Torah itself, to continue the incentive given by Sinai X, Avos 101, the wisdom of our sages. Learn, take this day and project it into your daily lives, into the future, to be able to determine the proper path in life, to make proper decisions with patience, deliberation, pondering, and seeking advice from friends and Torah sages, and hasten the day that God will return prophecy, and all of us will be imbued with prophetic vision, when the world will be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the sea soon in our days. Thank you.